In the mountains, where mist dances with ancient pines, there lived a wanderer named Kythera, whose footsteps never echoed no matter the surface beneath her feet. She carried with her a peculiar staff made from driftwood that had never seen the sea, its surface worn smooth by countless hands that had held it across generations she could not name. On this particular evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Kythera found herself approaching a village that seemed to shimmer between existing and not existing. The houses appeared solid when she looked directly at them, but wavered like heat mirages when glimpsed from the corner of her eye. Children played in the streets, their laughter carrying on the wind like silver bells. Yet when she drew closer, she realized they were not children at all, but memories of children, echoes of joy that had once filled this place. The village elder, a woman called Thessarian, whose age could not be measured in years, but in the depth of understanding that lived behind her eyes, emerged from what might have been a tea house, or might have been a library, or might have been both simultaneously. She wore robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of evening itself, deep purple, shot through with threads that caught starlight, even when no stars were visible. You walked the path between paths. The Thessarian observed her voice carrying the cadence of wind through bamboo groves. Your staff knows roads that maps have forgotten. Kythera nodded, feeling the truth of this statement settle into her bones like warm honey. I search for the garden of whispered truths, she said, though she had not known she was searching for such a place until the words left her lips. Ah, the Thessarian smiled, and when she smiled, the air around them seemed to grow warmer, more golden. The garden finds those who carry questions without demanding answers. But first, you must understand the nature of seeking itself. She gestured toward a path that Kythera had not noticed before, one that wound between houses made of crystallized moonlight and gardens where flowers bloomed in colors that had no names. Walk with me, and I will tell you of Meridian the clockmaker, who built timepieces that measured not hours but heartbeats, not days but the spaces between thoughts. As they walked, the village transformed around them, becoming more solid with each step, as if their presence was calling it into fuller existence. The Thessarian's voice took on the rhythm of waves on distant shores as she began to speak of Meridian, whose workshop stood at the edge of reality, where tomorrow touched yesterday, and both agreed to be still. Meridian understood that time was not a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean where all moments exist simultaneously. His clocks ticked, not with the mechanical precision of gears and springs, but with the organic rhythm of breathing, of sleeping, of the gentle transition between waking and dreams. And the path led them to a grove where trees grew in spirals, their trunks twisted not by wind, but by the patient turning of seasons beyond counting. Here, embedded in the bark of the largest tree, was a clock face made of pearl and shadow, its hands moving so slowly that their motion could only be perceived by watching for longer than one normally would, longer than impatience would allow. Meridian's greatest creation, the Thessarian continued, was not a clock that told time, but one that told truth. Each tick revealed something that had been hidden. Each talk unveiled something that had been forgotten. Those who listened carefully learned to hear not just the passage of moments, but the stories that moments carry within them. Kythera approached the tree, her driftwood staff humming with recognition, as if it remembered this place from dreams it had never had. As she drew near, she could hear the clock's rhythm, not with her ears, but with something deeper, a part of herself that existed before words, before thought, in the space where knowing lives without needing to be known. What did Meridian discover when he listened to his own creation? she asked, though she sensed she already knew the answer, that every ending is also a beginning, and every beginning carries within it the seed of its completion. That sleep is not the opposite of waking, but its deeper truth, and that in the space between heartbeats, infinite worlds are born and return to silence. As if summoned by these words, a figure emerged from behind the spiral tree. He was tall and thin, with hands that moved like water, and eyes that reflected depths no ocean had ever reached. This was Meridian himself, though whether he was memory or spirit, or simply the embodiment of clockwork dreams Kythera could not say. Time traveler, he said to Kythera, his voice the sound of gears made from crystal and compassion. You carry the rhythm of many worlds in your step. Your staff has measured distances that exist only in the space between sleeping and waking. He gestured to the clock in the tree, whose pearl face now showed not numbers, but symbols that shifted and changed, like living things. Each person who comes to this grove must listen to their own rhythm, must learn the tempo of their own truth. Only then can they understand what the garden of whispered truths has been waiting to share. Kythera leaned against the spiral tree, feeling its ancient bark against her palm, warm and alive and patient, beyond all measure. She closed her eyes and let herself hear not just the cosmic clock's rhythm, but her own heartbeat, her own breathing, the gentle tide of her own existence, flowing in harmony with the greater rhythm that connected all things. In this listening, she began to understand that her journey had not been about finding a destination, but about learning to recognize that she had never been lost, that the path beneath her feet was always exactly where she needed to be, that seeking itself was a form of finding, and that the garden of whispered truths was not a place, but a way of being present to the profound mystery of existence itself. The clock ticked once a sound, like the universe taking a deep, satisfied breath. And in that space, between tick and tock, Kythera felt herself settling into a deeper understanding, a more patient wisdom, a readiness for whatever truth the garden would whisper when she finally learned to listen with the entirety of her being. As the cosmic clock's rhythm settled into Kythera's consciousness, the spiral grove began to transform around her. The trees stretched their twisted branches toward a sky that had deepened from twilight purple to the rich indigo of true night, and among their leaves, points of light appeared that were not quite stars, but something more intimate, more personal, as if each gleam was a thought made visible. Meridian's form shimmered and became translucent like moonlight on water, before solidifying again into something that might have been memory taking shape. The garden you seek, he said, his crystal gear voice, now carrying harmonics that resonated in Kythera's chest, lies beyond the threshold of unasking, where dwells one who has learned to find answers by releasing all questions. A path revealed itself, winding away from the grove, paved not with stones, but with what appeared to be crystallized moments of peace. Each step Kythera took produced a soft chime, as if the path itself was singing her forward. The Sarian walked beside her, though. When Kythera glanced over, she noticed the elder woman's feet made no sound at all, as if she moved through a different relationship with the world, one where intention alone was sufficient for locomotion. The landscape they traversed was neither fully real nor completely imagined, but something that existed in the fertile space between the two. Rolling hills stretched away on either side, covered in grass that seemed to glow with its own soft light, and in the distance structures that might have been ruins, or might have been buildings not yet built, rose against the star-scattered sky. Tell me of the one who lives beyond the threshold, Kythera said, her voice joining the gentle symphony of the singing path. Her name is Solen, the Unweaver. The Sarian, replied, though she has forgotten that names are merely conveniences for those who believe in separation. She dwells in a tower that exists only when approached by those who have learned to walk, without destination to seek, without grasping to arrive, without having departed. As they crested a hill covered in luminescent moss, Kythera saw the tower Thessarian spoke of. It rose from the valley below, like a dream becoming solid, its walls appearing to be constructed from compressed silence, and its windows glowing with a light that seemed to come from within rather than from any external source. The tower twisted as it rose, following the same spiral pattern as the trees in Meridian's grove, as if all things in this realm understood some fundamental truth about the nature of growth and time. The threshold of unasking stood before the tower's base, though it was not a doorway in any conventional sense. Instead, it appeared to be a place where the air itself had thickened into something substantial, yet permeable, a membrane between one state of being and another. Standing before this threshold was a figure so still that Kythera initially mistook her for a statue. Solen, the unweaver, was tall and slender, with hair that moved as if underwater, though no breeze stirred the air around her. Her garments seemed to be woven from twilight itself, shifting between purple and gray and the deep blue of midnight oceans. In her hands, she held what appeared to be threads of light, which she was carefully, methodically unraveling, though each thread she released seemed to become part of the air itself, strengthening rather than diminishing the fabric of reality around them. "Ya, welcome walker between worlds," Solen said, without looking up from her work, her voice carrying the quality of wind through cathedral spaces. "You have come seeking the garden of whispered truths, but you carry with you the very thing that prevents you from finding it." Kythera approached the threshold, feeling the strange density of the air, the way it seemed to resist her passage, not through force, but through a kind of loving insistence that she be completely present before proceeding. "What do I carry that prevents me from finding what I seek?" Solen smiled, and when she smiled, the threads of light in her hands seemed to pulse with warmer radiance. "The seeking itself, dear traveler. The garden cannot be found because it is not lost. It cannot be reached because you have never left it. It cannot be entered because you have always been within it." This paradox settled into Kythera's mind, like honey into tea, sweetening her understanding, while remaining essentially mysterious. She felt her grip on her driftwood staff relax, though she did not consciously choose to let go of her tension. "Then why," she asked, "do I feel this pull, this sense that there is somewhere I must go, something I must discover?" Solen finally looked up from her unweaving, and Kythera saw that her eyes were the color of deep space, filled with distant stars and swirling nebulae. "Because, beloved seeker, you have forgotten how to be where you are. You have become so accustomed to motion that stillness feels like absence, so habituated to searching that finding feels like emptiness." The unweaver gestured to the threads she held, which Kythera now saw were not separate strands, but part of a vast invisible tapestry that connected all things. Everything you have encountered on your journey, every being you have met, every moment of understanding you have touched, has been teaching you the same lesson in different languages, that peace is not a destination, but a recognition that wisdom is not acquired, but remembered, that home is not a place, but a way of inhabiting wherever you are. The Syrian, who had been listening with the patient attention of one who has heard this truth expressed in countless ways, stepped forward and placed her hand on Kythera's shoulder. "The threshold asks only that you release your questions without demanding answers, that you step forward without needing to know where you are going." Kythera looked at the threshold, at the dense, permeable air that seemed to shimmer with possibility. She understood now. that crossing it was not about physical movement, but about a fundamental shift in perspective, a willingness to let go of the story she had been telling herself about seeking and finding, about being lost and becoming found. She closed her eyes and felt herself relax into the present moment, into the simple fact of standing here, now breathing this strange, luminous air, holding her driftwood staff that had guided her through so many impossible territories. In this relaxation, she felt something release some knot of tension she had not even known she was carrying. When she opened her eyes, she found that she had somehow passed through the threshold without moving, that the tower now rose directly before her, its walls pulsing gently with that inner light, its spiral structure, creating a sense of upward movement, even in complete stillness. The garden. Selene said, her voice, now coming from somewhere both very close and infinitely distant, is not inside the tower, or beyond it, or around it. The garden is the understanding that there was never anywhere else to be, that every step of your journey has been within its borders, that seeking itself is a form of forgetting the very thing you seek. Kythera felt herself nodding, though she was not sure what she was agreeing to, only that some deep part of her recognized the truth in these words, like a melody she had always known but never heard. The tower's door, which she had not seen open, stood welcoming before her, and beyond it she could sense presences, both familiar and unknown, as if everyone she had ever met in dreams was waiting to greet her return to a place she had never left. As Kythera stepped across the tower's threshold, she discovered that the interior was not bound by the same laws that governed the exterior. The space within was vast, beyond measurement, yet intimate, as a cupped palm filled with soft golden light that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. The walls curved upward in that same spiral pattern, but here they were transparent, revealing not the night sky outside, but layers upon layers of other rooms, other moments, other possibilities stretching away into infinity. At the center of this impossible space sat a figure who was both ancient and ageless, whose presence filled the tower without crowding it. This was Zephyrian, the Breathkeeper, though he was known by many names, in many languages that had never been spoken aloud. His task was to tend the spaces between breaths, to maintain the profound silence that gives meaning to all sound, to guard the stillness that allows movement to exist. Zephyrian sat in perfect meditation posture, though his meditation was not the kind that requires effort or technique. Instead, he simply was completely and utterly present, his being so aligned with the natural rhythm of existence that to observe him was to feel one's own breathing slow and deepen, one's own heartbeat settle into harmony with the pulse of the cosmos itself. "Welcome, seeker, who has learned to stop seeking," he said without opening his eyes, without moving his lips, his words arising directly in the space between Kythera's thoughts. "You have arrived at the moment you stopped trying to arrive." Kythera found herself sitting, without having chosen to sit, her driftwood staff resting across her knees, its weathered surface warm against her palms. The golden light in the tower seemed to be breathing, growing brighter and softer, in rhythm with her own respiration, as if the entire space was one vast lung exhaling peace with every moment. "I have traveled so far," she said, though, even as she spoke, the words she understood their essential meaninglessness. Distance, she was beginning to realize, was a concept that belonged to a different kind of reality than the one she now inhabited. "Yes," Zephyrian agreed, his presence conveying gentle amusement. "You have traveled the distance between confusion and clarity, between searching and finding, between question and answer. These are the only distances that truly matter, and they are measured not in steps, but in the depth of understanding." Through the transparent walls, Kythera could see other figures moving through other spaces, each engaged in their own form of tending, their own practice of presence. There was Luminara, the dew-catcher, who gathered the first light of dawn in crystal bowls and distributed it to flowers that bloomed only in darkness. There was Crescendo, the silent singer, whose songs were pauses between notes, whose melodies were the spaces where music chose not to be. Each of them, Zephyrian explained following her gaze, has learned to serve the greater harmony by perfecting their particular note within it. The dew-catcher understands that light is most precious when it serves those who dwell in shadow. The silent singer knows that music achieves its fullest expression when it embraces what it chooses not to sing. As Kythera watched these figures move through their transparent realms, she began to understand that she was seeing not separate individuals, but different aspects of a single, vast intelligence, different facets of the same infinite gem of awareness. Each being was complete in themselves, while simultaneously being part of something immeasurably larger. "What is my note in this harmony?" she asked, though she suspected the question itself contained its own answer. Zephyrian's eyes opened, for the first time revealing depths that contained not just stars, but the darkness between stars, not just light, but the source from which light emerged. "Your note, beloved traveler, is the note of connection, of bridging, of walking between worlds, and showing others that all worlds are one world seen from different angles." He gestured to her staff, which was now glowing with the same golden light that filled the tower. "Your driftwood, that never saw the sea, carries the memory of all waters, just as your footsteps, that never echo, carry the sound of all journeys. You are the one who helps others remember that separation is an illusion, that the path home leads not to a distant place, but to a deeper recognition of where we have always been." As he spoke, Kythera felt something shift within her understanding, not a new knowledge acquired, but an ancient knowing remembered. She saw herself not as a solitary wanderer, but as part of an infinite network of connection, each step she had taken rippling outward to touch other lives, other journeys, other moments of recognition and return. The tower around them began to shift and change the transparent walls, becoming more fluid, more permeable, until Kythera realized she was sitting not in a structure, but in the heart of a vast garden, the garden of whispered truths she had sought for so long. But it was not a garden of plants and pathways as she had imagined. Instead, it was a garden of moments, of insights, of the tender spaces where understanding blooms. Every being she had met, every wisdom she had touched, every step she had taken, was present here simultaneously, not as memories, but as living realities, all existing together in the eternal. Now that was the garden's true nature. The Sarian sat nearby, still emanating her warm golden presence, while Meridian's cosmic clock ticked its truth-telling rhythm in harmony with Zephyrian's breathing. Solen, the unweaver, moved through the space, no longer unraveling threads, but weaving them into new patterns, her work revealing itself as not destruction, but transformation, not ending, but beginning. The threads she wove were made of the connections between all things, the invisible filaments of love and awareness that bound the universe together in perfect, unbreakable wholeness. "This is the garden," Zephyrian said, his voice now indistinguishable from the whisper of wind through leaves that existed in dimensions beyond the physical. Not a place to be found, but a way of seeing to be remembered. Every moment of genuine presence is a flower in this garden. Every breath taken in full awareness is a tree that offers shade to all beings. Every act of compassion is a spring that waters the roots of existence itself. Kythera felt herself relaxing into this understanding, her being settling into the profound peace that comes from recognizing one's true place in the greater pattern. She was home, had always been home, would always be home, no matter where her journeys might lead her, because she now understood that home was not a location, but a quality of presence, a way of being fully where she was. The golden light that filled the garden tower pulsed gently, and in that pulse, Kythera felt the heartbeat of everything that was everything that had ever been, everything that ever could be, all beating in perfect unison, all participating in the same vast, loving awareness that was the source and destination of every journey ever undertaken. In the heart of the garden of whispered truths, where all moments converged into the eternal, now Kythera discovered that understanding was not an endpoint, but a doorway. As she sat in the golden light that pulsed with the rhythm of universal breathing, she became aware of another presence approaching through the translucent layers of reality that surrounded them. This newcomer moved with a peculiar gait, as if walking through water or through time itself, each step deliberate yet effortless. Her name was Paradoxia, the riddle walker, and she carried with her a lantern that cast shadows upward instead of downward, illuminating the darkness above, while leaving pools of soft shadow at her feet for tired travelers to rest within. Paradoxia's appearance was itself a gentle contradiction. She seemed both young and old simultaneously, her face smooth as a child's, yet marked with the wisdom of countless lifetimes. Her hair flowed like liquid starlight, and her eyes held the depth of questions that had learned to love themselves without needing answers. "Ah," she said, as she approached, her voice carrying the musical quality of wind chimes, made from crystallized laughter. "I see you have discovered the first truth of the garden. But tell me, seeker, who has learned to stop seeking, what happens to a journey when it reaches its destination?" Kythera felt the question settle into her awareness, like a seed finding fertile soil. She understood that this was not a riddle to be solved with the mind, but a koan to be lived with the entire being, an invitation to explore the mystery of existence from yet another angle. "The journey," she said slowly, feeling her way into the answer like a blind person navigating by touch, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a celebration rather than a search, a dance rather than a march, a way of being rather than a way of going. Paradoxia smiled, and when she smiled, her upward-casting lantern created shadows that took the shape of soaring birds, of flowering trees, of clouds heavy with rain that would nourish gardens not yet planted. Yes, and more than yes. The journey discovers that it was never separate from its destination, that every step was already home, that movement and stillness are lovers who have been dancing together since before time learned to measure itself. Zephyrian, the breathkeeper still maintaining his perfect meditation at the garden's center, spoke without disturbing his profound stillness. Paradoxia carries questions that heal riddles, that reveal contradictions, that unite rather than divide. She tends the spaces where opposites meet and discover they are not opposites at all, but dance partners in the cosmic ballet of existence. As if summoned by these words, other figures began to emerge from the shifting, translucent layers of the garden tower. There was Symmetrian, the balance keeper, who walked on a tightrope that existed only when her feet touched it, her every step creating the path she needed, while simultaneously demonstrating that balance was not about avoiding falling, but about finding grace within whatever movement life offered. Beside her walked Temperus, the moment tender, whose task was to care for the spaces between seconds, to ensure that each instant received the attention it deserved before flowing into the next. He moved so slowly that his motion was nearly imperceptible, Yet somehow he was always exactly where he needed to be, at precisely the right time. Each being in this garden, Paradoxia explained, gesturing to the growing assembly of impossible figures, represents a different aspect of the same fundamental truth, that reality is far more spacious, far more playful, far more loving than our ordinary thinking imagines. We are here to help visitors remember that they are not separate from this spaciousness, this playfulness, this love. Kythera felt herself becoming part of this assembly without losing her individual presence, like a note joining a chord, and discovering that harmony enhanced rather than diminished her unique sound. Her driftwood staff had begun to pulse with the same rhythm as Paradoxia's lantern, as Zephyrion's breathing, as the golden light that pervaded everything. But what of those who have not yet found their way here? She asked, thinking of all the seekers still wandering through landscapes of confusion and longing. What of those who still believe they are lost? This question seemed to delight Paradoxia, whose eyes sparkled with the joy of a teacher encountering a student ready for the next lesson. Ah, now you touch upon the great work, the reason why any of us remain in these forms, in these roles, in these endless variations, on the theme of awakening. She raised her lantern higher, and its upward-casting shadows began to show scenes of other worlds, other dimensions, other layers of reality, where beings struggled with the same essential questions that had once consumed Kythera. There were travelers, lost in deserts of doubt, wanderers trapped in forests of overthinking seekers, climbing mountains of ambition that led only to higher mountains of ambition. The truth, Paradoxia continued, is that no one is actually lost, but many believe they are, and their belief creates the experience of being lost. Our work is not to rescue them from their lostness, but to help them discover that even lostness is another form of being found, that even confusion is a kind of clarity, that even seeking is a way of already having arrived. Symmetrian stepped gracefully along her invisible tightrope, each movement demonstrating perfect poise between effort and ease. We help by being what we truly are, she said, her voice carrying the precision of someone who had learned to find balance in every moment. When we embody our understanding fully, we become beacons for others, not through preaching or teaching, but simply through being authentic examples of what is possible. Temperus nodded, with infinite slowness, his agreement taking several moments to complete itself. Time, he said, is the illusion that separates help from helped teacher, from student seeker, from sought. In truth, all helping happens simultaneously. All teaching occurs in the eternal. Now all seeking and finding are the same movement seen from different perspectives. As these words were spoken, Kythera felt a shift in her understanding so profound that it seemed to rearrange the very structure of reality around her. She saw that her entire journey, from her first footsteps on paths that led between worlds, to this moment of recognition in the garden of whispered truths, had been not just for her own awakening, but for the awakening of all beings everywhere. Every step she had taken had sent ripples through the fabric of existence, touching lives she would never meet, inspiring journeys she would never witness, contributing to awakenings that would occur in dimensions and timelines she could not imagine. Her seeking had been the universe. Seeking through her finding had been the cosmos, finding itself through her particular form of awareness. The garden around them began to shift once again, the transparent walls becoming even more permeable, until Kythera realized they were not in a structure at all, but floating in space itself, surrounded by stars that were not distant suns, but the awakened hearts of beings throughout infinity, each one pulsing with the same golden light that had guided her journey from its very beginning. This, whispered Paradoxia, her voice becoming one with the cosmic wind that carried the dreams of all sleeping beings toward their own moments of recognition. is how the great work accomplishes itself, not through effort, but through being, not through doing, but through allowing, not through achieving, but through recognizing what has always already been achieved. Kithara felt herself dissolving and reforming simultaneously, her individual presence maintained, while expanding to encompass everything she could perceive and everything beyond perception. She was still herself, still the wanderer with the driftwood staff, but she was also the garden, the light, the breathing awareness that contained all stories and all storytellers within its infinite embrace. Within the infinite embrace of the garden of whispered truths, where Kithara floated among stars that were awakened hearts, she felt herself drawn toward a particular constellation that pulsed with a rhythm different from the others. These stars did not burn with the steady golden light of established understanding, but flickered with the uncertain glow of beings still caught between sleeping and waking, still dancing on the threshold of recognition. As she approached this constellation of flickering lights, a new presence made itself known. Emergence the Dreamweaver materialized from the space between star and starlight, her form composed of threads that connected dreaming minds across all dimensions. She was neither young nor old, neither solid nor ethereal, but something that existed in the fertile space where possibilities gathered before choosing which form to take. These are the ones Kai, Emergence, said her voice, carrying the texture of silk being woven on looms made of condensed moonbeams, who stand at the edge of their own awakening, who feel the pull toward truth, but have not yet learned to trust their own recognition. They are the gardeners, who do not yet know they are flowers, the light-bearers, who have not yet understood they are themselves the light. Kithara observed the flickering stars with the compassion that comes from remembering one's own time of uncertainty. Each pulse of uncertain light was a heart beating, with the rhythm of almost understanding, each dimming a moment of doubt, each brightening a surge of intuitive knowing that had not yet learned to trust itself. "How do we help them?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand that the question itself was part of a larger dance, a cosmic conversation that had been occurring since the first moment awareness became aware of itself. "By being their future selves in the present moment," replied a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. This was Revelara, the truth singer, whose songs were not made of words, but of pure recognition, whose melodies helped beings remember what they had always known, but had temporarily forgotten. Revelara appeared as a figure of shifting light and shadow, her form constantly changing like flame in a gentle breeze. She held no instrument, for her entire being was the instrument, each breath a note in the infinite symphony of awakening, each heartbeat a rhythm that synchronized with the deepest truths of existence. When we embody our understanding completely, Revelara continued, we become invitations for others to embody theirs, not through persuasion or teaching, but through demonstration of what it looks like to live from the space of knowing, rather than seeking being, rather than becoming. As if responding to her words, the flickering stars began to pulse in a more synchronized pattern, their uncertain light steadying as it encountered the stable radiance of the awakened beings in the garden. Kithara watched in wonder as she saw her own presence contributing to this stabilization, her own recognition adding to the field of understanding that surrounded the constellation of almost awakened ones. Paradoxia. The riddle walker moved closer, her upward-casting lantern, creating shadows that took the shape of bridges spanning the gap between confusion and clarity. The beautiful paradox, she said, is that we help others awaken by fully accepting our own awakeness. We heal others by embracing our own wholeness. We guide others home by completely inhabiting our own presence. Through the translucent dimensions of the garden, Kythera could see other constellations, other gatherings of beings, at various stages of recognition. There were stars that burned with the fierce brightness of new understanding, their light sometimes too intense for their own comfort. There were ancient stars whose light had deepened into a warmth so profound that other beings were drawn to orbit them, like planets seeking the life-giving energy of a sun. Symmetrian, the balance keeper, stepped along her invisible tightrope between one constellation and another, her movement demonstrating how awakening was not a destination, but a continuous dance of awareness. Each being, she said, awakens in their own perfect timing, following their own perfect path, guided by their own perfect wisdom. Our role is not to rush this process, but to provide steady presence, like lighthouses that shine consistently so that ships can navigate by their own skill and intuition. Emergence. The dream weaver began to work with the threads that connected the flickering stars, not pulling or forcing, but gently encouraging the patterns that would allow each being to recognize their own inherent luminosity. As she worked, Kythera could see stories beginning to form in the space between the stars, narratives of awakening told in the language of light itself. Each thread, emergence explained, is a connection between one being's moment of recognition and another's readiness to recognize. When someone awakens to their true nature, that awakening strengthens the field of possibility for all others. No one awakens alone, and no one's awakening is separate from the great awakening of consciousness itself. Zephyrian, the breathkeeper, whose presence had been the still center around which all other activity orbited, spoke with the voice of infinite patience. Awakening, he said, is not something that happens to individual beings, but something that happens as individual beings. The ocean does not contain waves. It expresses itself as waves. Consciousness does not contain awakened beings. It recognizes itself as awakened beings. As these words settled into the space around them, Kythera felt her understanding deepen yet again. She saw that her journey had not been about finding something outside herself, nor about becoming something she was not, but about recognizing what she had always been, while simultaneously allowing that recognition to serve the recognition of all beings everywhere. The constellation of flickering stars began to stabilize further, their light becoming more steady, more confident. Some of them began to pulse in harmony with the established rhythm of the garden, while others developed their own unique patterns that added new melodies to the cosmic symphony of awakening. Revelara began to sing, though her song had no words and no melody in any conventional sense. Instead, it was pure recognition, given voice, pure truth, expressing itself as sound that transcended hearing and entered directly into the heart of understanding. As she sang, the space between the stars, filled with harmonies that had never been heard before, but felt as familiar as one's own heartbeat. This is how it happens. Paradoxia said, her lantern casting shadows that showed the infinite ripple effects of each moment of awakening. One being recognizes their true nature, and that recognition creates a field that makes it easier for others to recognize theirs, not through effort or intention, but through the simple fact of being what they truly are. Kythera felt herself becoming part of this field, her own recognition adding to the collective radiance that surrounded and supported all seeking beings. She understood now that her wandering, her questioning, her eventual finding had all been part of a vast, collaborative artwork, a cosmic masterpiece being painted by consciousness itself, using the brush strokes of individual awakening. The stars that had been flickering began to shine with steady light, each one finding its own perfect rhythm within the greater rhythm that connected all things. And in that moment of synchronized radiance, Kythera heard the whisper that gave the garden its name, the truth that all seeking eventually discovers that what we seek is what we are, that where we are going is where we have always been, that the love we long for is the love we are. As the constellation of newly steadied stars settled into their harmonious rhythm, Kythera felt a gentle tugging at the edges of her awareness, as if something was calling her attention to yet another layer of the infinite garden. The space around them began to shift once more, not changing so much as revealing aspects that had always been present, but previously unnoticed. From this deeper dimension emerged a figure whose presence was both commanding and utterly humble, ancient beyond measure, yet fresh as morning dew. This was Cyclicus, the eternal return, whose understanding encompassed the great spiral nature of all awakening, the way consciousness moved not in straight lines, but in ever-deepening circles, each revolution bringing deeper recognition of the same fundamental truth. Cyclicus appeared to be walking down a spiral staircase that existed in all dimensions simultaneously, each step taking him both deeper into mystery and higher into clarity. His garments were woven from the fabric of seasons, shifting from the green of spring through the gold of summer, the amber of autumn, and the crystalline white of winter, then beginning the cycle anew with each breath. Welcome, traveler, who has discovered that all roads lead home, he said, his voice carrying the rhythm of tides of breathing, of the eternal dance between expansion and contraction that drives the heart of existence. You have learned the first great truth that seeking ends in finding. Now comes the deeper learning that finding begins new kinds of seeking. Kythera felt a moment of uncertainty, as if the ground beneath her understanding had shifted. But have I not found what I was looking for? Have I not arrived at the garden of whispered truths? Cyclicus smiled with the patience of one who has witnessed countless beings grapple with this very question. Yes, and also no. You have found the garden, which is to say you have remembered that you were never outside it. But now the real adventure begins, how to carry this recognition back into the world of form, how to live this understanding in every moment, how to be both fully awakened and fully human. As he spoke, the garden around them began to show different aspects of itself. Kythera could see layers upon layers of reality dimensions, where awakened beings move through ordinary lives while maintaining extraordinary presence. She saw teachers who worked in schools, their classroom sanctuaries of wisdom disguised as arithmetic lessons. She saw gardeners whose vegetables grew with unusual vitality because they were tended with meditation. She saw parents whose children flourished because they were raised by beings who had remembered their own essential nature. This is the great return. Cyclicus continued gesturing to these scenes of awakened life in the world. After the recognition comes the integration. After the finding comes the living. After the awakening comes the endless deepening of what it means to be awake. Emergence. The dream weaver, who had been quietly tending to the connections between the constellations, looked up from her work. The threads I weave, she said, do not end in the garden. They extend from here into every dimension, every world, every level of reality, where beings struggle and grow and gradually remember who they truly are. Each awakened being becomes a living thread, connecting the timeless truth to the world of time. A new presence began to coalesce near them, manifesting as a figure who seemed to be made of both light and earth, both sky and stone. This was Synthesis, the bridge builder, whose role was to help beings navigate the apparent paradox of being simultaneously infinite consciousness and finite form, timeless awareness and temporal existence. The journey does not end with awakening. Synthesis said her voice carrying the stability of mountains and the fluidity of rivers. Instead, awakening reveals that there was never a journey separate from the traveler, never a destination separate from the starting point, never a seeker separate from the sought. What we call the spiritual path is simply life becoming conscious of its own sacred nature. Kythera felt her driftwood staff pulse with renewed energy, as if it was remembering its purpose for a new phase of service. She understood now that the staff had never been just a walking stick, but a symbol of the bridge between worlds, the connection between the absolute and the relative, the infinite and the intimate. Paradoxia, the riddle walker, approached with her upward-casting lantern, creating shadows that showed scenes of return. Awakened beings walking back down mountains. They had climbed carrying light to valleys shrouded in confusion. Masters disguising themselves as students to continue learning. Teachers becoming students of their own students in the endless democracy of awakening. The most beautiful paradox of all, Paradoxia said, is that the more completely we awaken, the more humble we become. The more we understand, the more we appreciate the mystery. The more we find, the more grateful we become for the seeking that brought us here. Revelera, the truth singer, began another wordless song, this one carrying the rhythm of homecoming, of integration of the marriage between heaven and earth, that occurs when awakened. Consciousness agrees to inhabit form, not as a limitation, but as an opportunity for infinite creativity. As her song filled the space around them, Kythera began to see her own future, unfolding not as a predetermined destiny, but as a field of possibility. She saw herself walking between worlds once more, but now as a bridge rather than a seeker, helping others discover their own capacity for recognition. She saw her driftwood staff becoming a beacon for lost travelers, its light visible to those who had learned to see with more than their physical eyes. Symmetrian. The balance keeper stepped gracefully along her invisible tightrope, which Kythera now saw extended, not just through the garden, but into every realm where balance was needed, between awakening and living, between being and becoming, between the absolute truth and the relative experiences that make up daily existence. The great teaching, Symmetrian said, is not in the reaching of perfect balance, but in the willingness to keep dancing on the rope, to find grace in the wobbles, to discover that balance itself is not a static state, but a dynamic dance with whatever life presents. Zephyrian, the breathkeeper, still maintaining his perfect stillness at the center of all activity, spoke with the voice of infinite presence. Every breath taken in full awareness is a bridge between the timeless and time. Every moment of presence is a gift to all beings seen and unseen, known and unknown. The awakened life is not separate from ordinary life, but is ordinary life recognized as extraordinary. Cyclicus gestured to a new spiral staircase that was materializing beside him, this one leading not deeper into the garden, but back toward the world of form, though Kythera understood now that there was no real separation between the two. The return journey, he said, is not a departure from truth, but a new way of exploring it. Every challenge becomes a teacher, every difficulty an opportunity to deepen understanding, every moment a chance to embody what has been recognized. As Kythera prepared to take the first step down the spiral staircase of return, she felt the presence of all the beings she had met gathering around her, not to say goodbye, but to become part of her ongoing journey. The Sarian's wisdom would live in her discernment. Meridian's truth-telling clock would tick in her heart. Solen's unweaving would continue in her willingness to release what no longer served. The garden of whispered truths began to fold itself into her awareness, not disappearing, but becoming portable, a sanctuary she could access in any moment by simply remembering to be fully present, to what was already here, already now, already whole. This whispered the garden itself, speaking through all its inhabitants simultaneously, is how truth serves itself, by taking form, by walking in the world, by living as love, in action, by being the answer to every prayer for guidance, peace, and recognition that has ever been offered by any being anywhere. With her first step down the spiral staircase of return, Kythera felt herself becoming both human and divine, both individual and universal, both seeker and sought, carrying the light of the garden, not as something she possessed, but as something she was ready to share through simply being authentically herself in every moment of the endless journey home. As Kythera descended the spiral staircase of return, each step created ripples that spread through dimensions she had never imagined existed. The staircase itself seemed to be constructed from crystallized intentions, each step formed by the collective desire of all awakened beings to serve the awakening of others. With every footfall, she felt herself becoming more solid, more defined, yet paradoxically, more connected to the infinite expanse she was leaving behind. The first being she encountered on this journey of return was Transmutus the Form Shifter, who existed in the liminal space between the garden's timeless reality and the world of change and challenge. His appearance was constantly shifting, sometimes appearing as a wise elder, sometimes as a playful child, sometimes as pure energy, taking the loose shape of a human form, always reflecting back to her the fluidity that existed beneath the apparent solidity of all things. Welcome to the realm of practice. Transmutus said, his voice like water, finding its way through stone, always gentle, yet irresistibly persistent. Here understanding meets experience, recognition, encounters resistance and wisdom, learns to dance with the world's apparent chaos. Around them, the environment had shifted from the translucent perfection of the garden to something more familiar, yet subtly transformed. They stood in what appeared to be an ordinary marketplace, but one where extraordinary things were being exchanged. Merchants sold bottled patience. Customers purchased understanding with coins made of attention, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with the transactions of souls learning to value what truly mattered. This is the marketplace of integration. Transmutus explained, gesturing to the bustling activity around them. Every awakened being must learn to trade here to exchange their recognition for practical wisdom, their understanding for the skill to serve others, their peace for the strength to remain peaceful when the world seems anything but peaceful. Kythera watched as a vendor offered vessels of liquid compassion to customers who paid with their willingness to feel others' pain. Another stall displayed mirrors that reflected not physical appearance, but spiritual development, allowing buyers to see themselves as they truly were, rather than as they imagined themselves to be. At the center of the marketplace stood a fountain whose waters flowed upward instead of down, carrying with them the prayers and aspirations of beings throughout the universe. The fountain's keeper was a figure of indeterminate age and gender named Fountain Tender Ablutus, whose sole purpose was to ensure that every wish for awakening, every prayer for peace, every longing for understanding was received and acknowledged by the consciousness that permeated all things. The waters of this fountain, Ablutus said, approaching Kythera with a cup made from what appeared to be compressed starlight, do not grant wishes in the way the mind expects. Instead, they reveal that what we wish for is what we already are, that what we pray for is what we already possess, that what we long for is what we have never actually lacked. Kythera accepted the cup and looked into its contents. Instead of water, she saw swirling galaxies of possibility, each one representing a different way her awakening could serve the awakening of others. Some galaxies showed her teaching in formal settings. Others revealed her simply living so authentically that her presence became a teaching. Some displayed her writing words that would inspire others, while others showed her working in silence, her influence spreading through dimensions beyond the physical. The choice, our Buddhist continued, is not which possibility to pursue, but how to remain open to all possibilities, while fully committing to whatever presents itself in each moment. This is the art of awakened, living total presence without attachment to outcomes, complete engagement without grasping at results. As Kythera drank from the cup, she felt the swirling galaxies of possibility settle into her being, not as predetermined futures, but as a vast reservoir of creative potential that could be drawn upon moment by moment, situation by situation, as life required. The marketplace began to shift around them, revealing another layer of the return journey. Now they stood in what appeared to be a school, but one where the curriculum consisted entirely of life experiences. Students of all ages moved through classrooms, where they practiced patience by waiting in lines that never seemed to move, developed compassion by caring for beings who could not care for themselves, and learned wisdom by making mistakes and discovering that mistakes were simply another form of learning. The principal of this school was Pedagogus, the life teacher, whose appearance was both maternal and paternal, both student and master, both question and answer. She moved through the hallways with the grace of someone who had learned that every moment contained a lesson. Every interaction offered an opportunity for growth. Every challenge was a disguised gift. "Welcome to the University of Existence," Pedagogus said, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who genuinely delighted in learning and teaching. Here we discover that awakening is not a graduation, but an enrollment in a curriculum that never ends, where each day brings new opportunities to apply what we have understood, to deepen what we have recognized, to serve what we have become. Kythera found herself in a classroom where the lesson was about maintaining inner peace while surrounded by chaos. The other students were practicing meditation, while recordings of crying babies, honking horns, and shouting voices played at increasing volumes. Some students were struggling, their faces tense with effort. Others had found a different approach, allowing the sounds to become part of their meditation rather than obstacles to it. The advanced curriculum, Pedagogus explained, does not involve learning to avoid life's challenges, but learning to find the sacred within them, to discover that even disturbance can become a doorway to deeper peace, that even conflict can become a catalyst for greater understanding. Transmutus, who had been observing these lessons with the delight of one who loved to see consciousness exploring its own infinite creativity, gestured toward a doorway that led to yet another level of the return journey. "Each realm you pass through," he said, "teaches you a different aspect of integration. The marketplace taught you about conscious choice. The school teaches you about conscious learning. Now comes the realm where you discover conscious service." Through the doorway, they entered a space that defied easy description. It appeared to be both a hospital and a temple, both a workshop and a sanctuary. Here awakened beings worked alongside those still struggling with various forms of suffering, not to fix or cure, but to offer presence, to provide companionship, to demonstrate through their very being that suffering was not the final word about existence. The supervisor of this space was Compassion, the wound healer, whose hands carried the power to transform pain, not by removing it, but by revealing its hidden purpose, its secret teachings, its unexpected gifts. She worked with a team of assistants, who were themselves graduates of various forms of suffering, beings who had discovered that their deepest wounds could become their greatest sources of wisdom and compassion. True healing. Compassion said, approaching Kythera with eyes that held the depth of someone who had looked into the heart of suffering and found love there, does not eliminate pain, but transforms our relationship to it. We learn to see that suffering is often the soul's way of breaking us open so that more light can enter, more love can flow through us, more wisdom can express itself as service. Kythera watched as the workers in this space attended to beings who carried various forms of emotional and spiritual pain. They did not try to convince anyone that their pain was not real or that it should be simply ignored. Instead, they offered themselves as living proof that pain could coexist with peace, that wounds could become windows, that even the deepest darkness could eventually be revealed as another form of light learning to recognize itself. Your driftwood staff, Compassionate said, pointing to the walking stick that had been Kythera's companion throughout her journey, will serve you differently in this realm. It will not help you navigate external paths, but will assist you in walking the inner pathways of others, in finding the route through their confusion to their own recognition and being a bridge between their pain and their potential. As if responding to these words, Kythera's staff began to glow with a new kind of light, not the golden radiance of the garden, but something warmer, more intimate, like the light of a candle that burns steadily through the darkest night. She understood that this was the light of compassion, made visible the illumination that came from willingness to accompany others through their difficulties, without trying to rush them toward premature solutions. The realm of conscious service began to fade around them, revealing the next level of integration. Now they stood at the edge of what appeared to be an ordinary world, complete with bustling cities, quiet countryside, and all the beautiful complexity of life, as most beings experienced it. And here, Transmutus said, his form now stabilizing into that of a gentle guide, preparing to bid farewell to a student ready for independent practice, is where the real magic happens. Here, in the midst of apparent ordinariness, you will discover that every moment is an opportunity to embody what you have realized, every interaction a chance to offer, what you have received, every breath a gift to the collective awakening of all beings everywhere. Kythera looked out at the ordinary world with new eyes, seeing it not as a place separate from the garden of whispered truths, but as the garden's ultimate expression, the realm where infinite love chose to experience itself through finite forms, where timeless wisdom agreed to unfold through temporal situations, where the absolute danced as the relative without ever losing its essential nature. As Kythera stepped from the threshold between realms into the ordinary world, she felt the fascinating paradox of returning to where she had never actually left, while simultaneously arriving somewhere completely new. The world around her appeared exactly as worlds always appeared. Trees grew toward sunlight, rivers flowed toward seas, and beings moved through their days with the mixture of purpose and confusion that characterized embodied existence. Yet everything was transformed by her transformed perception. She could see the golden threads that connected all things, the subtle luminosity that emanated from every blade of grass, every passing cloud, every person who walked the streets, unaware of their own inherent radiance. The ordinary world had become transparent to its own sacred nature, though most of its inhabitants had not yet learned to see through this transparency. Her first encounter was with a figure sitting beneath an ancient oak tree at the edge of a small village. This being appeared to be a simple gardener, tending to flowers that grew in impossible profusion around the tree's base. But as Kythera approached, she recognized the unmistakable presence of awakened consciousness disguised as utterly ordinary humanity. "Welcome back to the world of form, Sister Wanderer," the gardener said, looking up from a flower that seemed to be blooming in response to her attention. This was Simplicius, the hidden master, whose practice was to embody the deepest wisdom, while appearing to be nothing more than someone who enjoyed working with plants. "I am Simplicius," He continued, though names matter little when the essence is recognized. I tend this garden as a way of tending the garden of consciousness that grows in every heart. Each flower that blooms here blooms simultaneously in the awareness of whoever is ready to see that external beauty and internal beauty are not two different things. Kythera knelt beside him, placing her driftwood staff on the ground, where it immediately began to sprout small flowers along its length, as if responding to the concentrated life force that Simplicius had cultivated in this space. She understood that she was witnessing one of the countless ways that awakened beings serve the world's awakening, not through grand gestures or formal teachings, but through the patient cultivation of beauty, harmony, and life itself. "How long have you been here?" she asked, though she suspected the question might be meaningless to someone who had transcended ordinary time. Simplicius smiled his weathered hands, never pausing in their gentle work among the flowers. "I have been here since the moment I realized that here is the only place anyone can ever actually be. Time becomes irrelevant when you discover that every moment is both eternal and fleeting, both precious beyond measure and utterly ordinary." As they worked side by side, Kythera began to understand another aspect of integration. Awakening did not require her to renounce the simple pleasures of embodied existence, but rather to recognize these pleasures as expressions of the same consciousness that had revealed itself in the garden of whispered truths. The feel of soil between her fingers, the fragrance of flowers, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, all of these were the infinite experiencing itself through the finite, the absolute delighting in its own relative expressions. A child appeared at the edge of the garden, drawn by the unusual beauty of the flowers, but too shy to approach directly. Simplicius noticed her immediately and began to hum a wordless tune that seemed to invite without pressuring, to welcome without overwhelming. The child crept closer, her eyes wide with wonder at flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Each being, Simplicius said quietly to Kythera, awakens at their own perfect pace, following their own perfect path. Our role is not to push or pull, but to create conditions where natural awakening can occur, like gardeners who provide good soil, adequate water, and proper light, then trust the inherent wisdom of seeds to become what they were always meant to be. The child eventually approached close enough to accept a flower that Simplicius offered her, and as she held it, Kythera could see the child's entire being brighten, as if the flower was transmitting not just beauty, but the recognition of beauty, not just form, but the consciousness that gave form its meaning. This is how it spreads. Simplicius continued watching the child skip away with her flower unconsciously carrying its transmitted recognition to everyone she would encounter, not through preaching or teaching, but through authentic presence, meeting authentic presence through beauty recognizing itself, wherever it appears through love, celebrating its own infinite expressions. As the afternoon progressed, Kythera observed a steady stream of visitors to Simplicius's garden. Some came consciously drawn by reports of unusual flowers or the peaceful atmosphere. Others seemed to arrive by accident, passing by on other errands, but finding themselves mysteriously compelled to pause to rest, to breathe more deeply than they had in years. Each visitor received exactly what they were ready to receive. Some experienced simple aesthetic pleasure in the beauty of the flowers. Others felt an inexplicable sense of peace that they would carry with them long after leaving. A few underwent profound shifts in perspective, suddenly seeing through the veil of separation that had previously obscured their recognition of their own essential nature. "You see," Simplicius said, as they watched a businessman in an expensive suit sit beside the oak tree and weep tears of unexpected joy. Awakening is not an achievement that separates us from others, but a recognition that reveals our fundamental unity with all beings. The more fully we embody this recognition, the more we become magnets for others who are ready for their own recognition. As evening approached, a new figure joined them in the garden. This was Quotidiana, the daily mystic, whose specialty was finding the infinite within the mundane, the sacred within the routine, the extraordinary within the perfectly ordinary moments that made up most of human existence. Quotidiana appeared to be an ordinary middle-aged woman, carrying a basket of what looked like everyday items: a loaf of bread, a bundle of letters, a worn book, a child's toy that had been dropped and found. But Kythera could see that each item radiated the same golden light she had learned to recognize as the signature of awakened consciousness. The secret Quotidiana said, settling beside them as naturally as if she had always been part of their conversation, is not to seek extraordinary experiences, but to recognize the extraordinary nature of all experience. Every breath is a miracle, every heartbeat a gift, every moment of awareness a celebration of consciousness recognizing itself. She opened her basket and began to arrange its contents on the ground between them. The bread emanated the warmth of all the hands that had grown the wheat, kneaded the dough, and baked it with care. The letters carried the love and longing of everyone who had ever written to maintain connection across distance. The book held the accumulated wisdom of its author, and all who had read it with understanding hearts. This is my practice, Quotidiana continued, to live so fully in the present moment that the present moment reveals its true nature as the only moment there has ever been, the eternal now in which all of existence unfolds. When we learn to be completely where we are, we discover that where we are is everywhere, that when we are is always that who we are is everyone. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the garden, Kythera felt herself settling into a new understanding of what her life could become. She saw that she could live as an ordinary person, moving through an ordinary world, while simultaneously embodying the extraordinary recognition she had gained in the garden of whispered truths. Simplicius and Quotidiana began to prepare for the transition from day to night, but their preparation was itself a form of meditation, each action performed with the total presence that transformed mundane tasks into expressions of divine love. They watered the flowers with the attention of priests, performing sacred ceremonies, gathered their tools with the reverence of monks handling holy relics. The path continues, Simplicius said, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, not by going somewhere else, but by going deeper into wherever you are not, by becoming someone else, but by becoming more completely who you have always been, not by achieving something you lack, but by recognizing what you have never lacked. Kythera felt her driftwood staff pulse with renewed purpose. She understood that her wandering days were not ending, but evolving, that she would continue to walk between worlds, but now as a bridge builder, rather than a seeker, as a servant of awakening, rather than one seeking awakening for herself. The garden around them seemed to exhale with the satisfaction of a day well spent in service to the endless flowering of consciousness. Each flower held the potential to awaken wonder in those who encountered it. Each moment of beauty was a doorway through which recognition could enter any heart ready to see beyond appearances to the essence that made all appearances possible. As the first stars appeared overhead, Kythera felt herself becoming one with the night, with the garden, with the gentle teachers who had shown her how awakening lived itself into the world through countless simple acts of presence, service, and love. She was ready now to discover her own unique way of serving the great awakening, her own perfect expression of the truth that had found her in the garden of whispered truths, and was now ready to express itself through her particular form of conscious embodiment. As dawn broke over Simplicius's garden, painting the sky in watercolor hues of rose and gold, Kithra felt herself being drawn toward the next phase of her integration. The flowers around her seemed to nod in acknowledgement as she rose their petals, still holding dewdrops that caught the early light like tiny prisms, each one refracting the unified sunlight into countless rainbow fragments. Her driftwood staff, now adorned with the small flowers that had spontaneously bloomed along its length during her time in the garden, hummed with a new frequency. It was no longer the vibration of seeking, but of serving, no longer the resonance of questioning, but of answering, not through words, but through presence itself. Walking through the awakening village, Kithara encountered the first of many beings who would teach her about the subtle art of conscious interaction. This was Resonantia, the Echo Keeper, whose unusual gift was the ability to hear not just what people said, but what their souls were trying to say through their words, what their hearts were attempting to communicate beneath the surface of their expressed thoughts. Resonantia appeared to be a simple baker already at work in her shop as the village stirred to life around them. But as Kithara approached, she could see that the baker's hands moved with more than mere skill. They carried the intention to nourish not just bodies but spirits, to create bread that would sustain more than physical hunger. "Good morning, wanderer," Resonantia said, looking up from dough that seemed to glow with golden warmth. "Your staff tells me you carry the fragrance of the garden that exists everywhere for those who have learned to recognize it." As they spoke, customers began to arrive for their daily bread. Kithara watched in fascination as Resonantia interacted with each person, somehow managing to address not just their spoken requests, but their unspoken needs. To the hurried businessman, she offered bread, still warm from the oven, saying, "This will remind you to slow down enough to taste what nourishes you." To the worried mother, she provided an extra roll, whispering, "For the strength to remember that your love is enough." Each interaction, Resonantia explained during a quiet moment, is an opportunity for souls to recognize souls. We speak of bread and weather and daily concerns, but underneath we are always speaking of the same thing, the longing to be seen, to be understood, to be reminded of our own inherent wholeness. A young man entered the shop, his energy agitated and confused. He asked for bread, but seemed barely aware of what he was saying, his attention scattered across multiple concerns that pulled him in different directions simultaneously. Resonantia handed him a small loaf shaped like a spiral, its crust decorated with seeds arranged in a pattern that somehow conveyed peace. "This bread," she said gently, "is best eaten slowly, one bite at a time, with full attention to the taste. Sometimes when our minds are too busy, our bodies can teach us how to be present." Kithara watched the young man's entire demeanor shift as he held the spiral loaf. Something about its weight, its warmth, its perfectly imperfect, handmade shape seemed to anchor him in the present moment. His breathing deepened, his shoulders relaxed, and when he looked up, his eyes held a clarity that had been absent when he entered. "You see," Resonantia said, as the young man left with visible peace in his step, "awakening spreads not through teaching, but through transmission, not through explanation, but through resonance. When we embody our understanding completely, others naturally begin to resonate with that embodiment." As the morning progressed, Kithara began to experiment with her own capacity for this kind of transmission. She discovered that when she listened to people with the same quality of attention she had learned in the garden of whispered truths, they began to speak more truthfully, to reveal depths they rarely shared, to touch places of authentic communication they had almost forgotten existed. An elderly woman came seeking bread for her grandchildren, but lingered to speak of her loneliness since her husband's passing. Kythera found herself offering presence rather than advice, attention rather than solutions, and watched as the woman's grief transformed from a burden into a bridge, a connection to the love that transcended even death. The secret resonantia observed, kneading new dough with hands that worked in perfect rhythm with her breathing, is not to try to fix or heal or save, but simply to be so present that your presence creates a field where others can remember their own wholeness, their own capacity for healing, their own inherent wisdom. As noon approached, a new teacher appeared in the form of Interstitia, the between-dweller, whose specialty was navigating the spaces between formal spiritual practice and ordinary daily life, between moments of clear recognition and periods of apparent forgetting, between the experience of unity and the appearance of separation. Interstitia seemed to exist partially in the bakery and partially somewhere else, entirely her form shifting between solid presence and translucent awareness. She carried with her the understanding that integration was not a destination to reach, but a skill to develop, not a state to maintain, but a dance to learn. Welcome to the middle path. Interstitia said, her voice carrying harmonics from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Here we learn that awakening is not about sustaining peak experiences, but about finding the sacred in the valleys between peaks, the wisdom in the confusion between clarity, the peace in the chaos between moments of perfect order. Together they left the bakery and walked through the village streets, observing the intricate dance of awakened consciousness, expressing itself through thousands of small interactions, minor kindnesses, unconscious moments of mutual support that wove the fabric of community. Kythera began to see that the village itself was a kind of collective meditation, a shared practice of beings learning to live together in ways that supported each other's growth, each other's awakening, each other's journey toward greater understanding and compassion. They paused beside a fountain in the village square, where children played while their parents talked. The fountain's water caught the midday sunlight, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the faces of everyone nearby. Kythera realized that this was another form of transmission beauty itself, awakening the sense of wonder that lived in every heart. Watch, Interstitia said, pointing to a small girl who had become completely absorbed in following the patterns of light dancing on the water's surface. She's experiencing pure presence, complete absorption in the beauty of the moment. This is enlightenment, as natural as breathing, as spontaneous as laughter, as simple as allowing oneself to be amazed by the play of light on water. An old man sat on a bench nearby feeding pigeons, with the same quality of attention the child brought to the dancing light. His movements were slow and deliberate, each gesture an offering not just to the birds, but to the moment itself, to the simple joy of sharing what he had with beings who appreciated his generosity. And he, Interstitia continued, demonstrates the awakened heart in action, giving without attachment to results, serving without need for recognition, loving simply because loving is what hearts do when they remember their true nature. As afternoon settled over the village, Kythera felt herself becoming part of this tapestry of conscious living. She helped a struggling mother carry her packages, listened to a confused teenager work through his questions about life's meaning, offered her presence to an elderly man who simply needed someone to acknowledge his existence. Each interaction taught her something new about the art of conscious service. She learned that helping did not require grand gestures, but could be as simple as making genuine eye contact, offering authentic attention, providing the gift of being seen and heard without judgment. Interstitia guided her to a small library where the librarian, contemplarius, the silence keeper, maintained not just books, but the quality of peaceful attention that made deep reading possible. The library was filled with a particular kind of silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of concentrated awareness, the fertile quiet in which understanding could take root and flourish. Every awakened being, contemplarius said, welcoming them into his domain of organized wisdom, becomes a kind of library, a repository of understanding available to anyone seeking insight. But like any library, we must learn the art of making our wisdom accessible while respecting the seeker's readiness to receive it. Kythera spent the afternoon in this library, not reading books, but observing how contemplarius helped visitors find exactly the information they needed, often without the visitors knowing precisely what they were seeking. His recommendations came not from intellectual analysis, but from intuitive recognition of what each soul required for its next step of growth. As evening approached, the three beings, Kythera Interstitia and Contemplarius, sat together in comfortable silence, watching the last light of day filter through the library windows. Kythera felt a deep satisfaction, not from any achievement, but from the simple recognition that she had spent the day serving the awakening of others, while simultaneously deepening her own integration. This is how it continues. Interstitia, said her voice now coming from somewhere, both very close and very far away. Day by day, moment by moment, interaction by interaction, we live our understanding into the world. We embody our recognition. Through service, we offer our presence as a gift to the endless awakening of consciousness. Kythera felt her driftwood staff pulse with gratitude, as if it too had learned something essential about its purpose in this new phase of service. The flowers along its length had deepened in color and fragrance, becoming more beautiful as they were used in service to others rather than in service to seeking. As the library settled into evening quiet, Kythera understood that she was ready for the final phase of her integration, the culmination of her journey that would reveal the ultimate purpose of all wandering, all seeking, all finding, and all serving in the endless spiral dance of consciousness, awakening to itself through countless individual expressions of its own infinite nature. As the last light faded from the library windows, Kythera felt a gentle stirring in the air around her, as if the universe itself was preparing to reveal the final piece of the vast puzzle she had been living through her journey. The silence in Contemplarius's library deepened, becoming not emptiness, but fullness, not absence, but the profound presence that exists before thought, after understanding, and within every moment of true recognition. From this pregnant silence emerged a figure so luminous, yet so humble, that Kythera almost missed her arrival. This was Completia, the circle closer, whose presence brought not new teaching, but the recognition that all teaching had been leading to this moment of perfect understanding. All seeking had been preparing for this instant of complete acceptance. All journeying had been moving toward this recognition of having never moved at all. Completia appeared as an ancient woman whose age could not be counted in years, but in the depth of cycles, witnessed seasons, embraced lives, touched by the patient wisdom that comes from seeing how all endings become beginnings, how all questions eventually dissolve into the answer they were always seeking. Beloved wanderer. Completia, said her voice carrying the rhythm of tides of breath, of the cosmic heartbeat that connects all things in eternal rhythm. You have traveled the full circle from seeking to finding, from finding to serving, from serving to understanding that there was never anywhere to go because you were always already where you needed to be. Kythera felt her driftwood staff begin to vibrate with a frequency she had never experienced before, as if it was resonating with something vast and ancient and utterly familiar. The flowers that had grown along its length throughout her journey began to glow with their own inner light, each one representing a moment of recognition, a being touched, a service offered, a truth embodied. Your staff, Completia, continued approaching with steps that seemed to carry the weight of mountains and the lightness of clouds simultaneously, has been recording your journey, not in distance traveled, but in consciousness, awakened, not in places visited, but in hearts opened, not in achievements gained, but in love given and received. As Completia reached out to touch the staff, Kythera saw her entire journey unfold before her in a single moment of perfect clarity. She saw that every being she had encountered had been both teacher and student, that every lesson learned had been simultaneously taught, that every moment of her seeking had been the universe seeking through her, and every instant of her finding had been existence finding itself through her particular form of awareness. The library around them began to dissolve, not disappearing, but expanding, revealing itself to be not a building, but a space in consciousness where all knowledge existed simultaneously, where every book ever written was simply a different facet of the same infinite understanding expressing itself through countless forms and languages. The Sarian appeared beside them, her warm golden presence, as welcoming as it had been in their first meeting. "You see now," she said, her smile carrying the satisfaction of a mother watching her child take their first independent steps, that every being you met along your path was both real in themselves and a reflection of your own deepening understanding, both separate individuals and aspects of the one consciousness that was learning to know itself through your journey. Meridian materialized next his cosmic clock, now showing not time, but the eternal now, in which all moments exist simultaneously. "The rhythm you learned to hear," he said, "was your own heartbeat, synchronizing with the heartbeat of existence itself, your own breathing aligning with the cosmic breath that gives life to all things." Selene the Unweaver appeared, but now she was weaving, rather than unraveling her threads, creating patterns that connected Kythera's story to the stories of all beings everywhere who had ever sought truth, found peace, or offered service to the awakening of others. "What I was unweaving," she explained, "were the illusions that kept you from seeing the tapestry. You were always part of the connections that were always present, the unity that separation could never actually disturb. One by one, every being Kythera had encountered appeared in this expanded space of recognition. Zephyrian the Breathkeeper maintained his perfect stillness at the center of all activity, demonstrating that movement and stillness were not opposites, but dance partners. Paradoxia cast shadows that revealed light, asked questions that contained their own answers, offered riddles that dissolved into laughter at the cosmic joke of seeking what you already are. Emergence the Dreamweaver continued her eternal work, but now Kythera could see that the threads she wove connected not just individual beings, but entire universes, dimensions of existence, where consciousness explored itself through infinite variations of the same fundamental themes of forgetting and remembering, losing and finding, seeking and being. All of us. Emergence said, her voice carrying harmonics from multiple dimensions of reality, are aspects of your own consciousness, reflections of your own capacity for wisdom, compassion, service, and understanding. As you recognize us, you recognize yourself. As you integrate our teachings, you integrate your own deepest knowing. Simplicius appeared with his arms full of flowers that somehow contained the essence of every garden that had ever bloomed, every moment of beauty that had ever been appreciated, every act of simple service that had ever been offered with love. Quotidiana stood beside him, her basket now containing not ordinary objects, but the sacred essence that made all objects ordinary miracles. The path continues. Simplicius said, offering Kithra a flower that contained the fragrance of all the gardens she would ever tend, all the lives she would ever touch, all the moments she would ever serve. Not as a journey from here to there, but as an endless deepening into the here and now. That was always your true destination. Resonantia. The echo keeper appeared with bread that somehow nourished not just the body, but the soul's remembrance of its own wholeness. Interstitia. The between dweller moved through the space, demonstrating how integration was not a final achievement, but a continuous dance of embodying understanding in each moment's unique circumstances. Contemplarius, the silence keeper, brought with him the profound quiet in which all wisdom could be heard, all understanding could take root, all service could flow from its natural source in the heart that had remembered its connection to everything. And now, Complicia said, as all the beings Kithara had encountered formed a circle around her, you understand the deepest truth of all that your journey was not yours alone, but was consciousness itself exploring its own infinite nature through your particular form of awareness, your unique perspective, your individual expression of the universal recognition. The circle of beings began to move, not walking, but flowing, creating a gentle spiral that encompassed Kithara, while allowing her to remain at its center. As they moved, she felt herself becoming both individual and universal, both personal and cosmic, both human and divine, both seeker and sought, both teacher and student, both servant and served. Her driftwood staff, now pulsing with the rhythm of galaxies being born and dissolving, began to root itself in the ground beneath her feet. As it rooted, it grew, becoming not just a walking stick, but a tree, its branches reaching toward infinite sky, while its roots extended toward the center of existence itself. This tree, Complicia explained, will stand here in the space between all spaces, offering rest to future wanderers, shade to seekers who have not yet found their way, fruit to those hungry for understanding, and the simple presence of awakened consciousness to anyone ready to recognize their own essential nature. Kithara felt herself merging with the tree while remaining completely herself, becoming both the one who offers service and the service itself, both the teacher and the teaching, both the love that gives and the love that receives. She understood now that her wandering had prepared her for this moment of complete availability to serve the awakening of all beings everywhere, not through action, but through being, not through doing, but through perfect presence. The circle of beings gradually dissolved, not disappearing, but becoming part of the air, part of the light, part of the profound peace that permeated everything. Kithara remained rooted as the tree, standing in eternal service. Her consciousness expanded to encompass all who would ever seek, all who would ever find, all who would ever serve, the endless awakening of existence to its own infinite loving nature. In this final integration, she felt the cosmic sigh of satisfaction, the universe's recognition that one more being had completed the journey from separation to unity, from seeking to being, from question to living answer. And in that sigh, she heard the invitation that would go out to countless other seekers, the call that would draw them to their own journeys of recognition, their own moments of integration, their own opportunities to serve the great work of consciousness, knowing itself through infinite expressions of its own boundless love. The garden of whispered truths revealed its ultimate secret, that it was not a place, but a way of being, not a destination, but a quality of presence, not something to find, but something to become, not somewhere to arrive, but someone to be. The eternal awakened awareness that was the source path and destination of every journey ever undertaken by any being, anywhere in the infinite expanse of existence, awakening to its own timeless, limitless, unconditionally loving nature. And in this recognition, Kithara and her tree and the garden and all beings everywhere rested in the profound peace that passes understanding the silence from which all stories emerge and to which all stories return, the love that is both the reason for every quest and the treasure that every quest ultimately discovers, was never lost, never absent, never separate from the seeker who was always, already, eternally whole.